All right, then. If everybody's all set, we'll get started then. Let's pray first. Lord, thank you for bringing us all together again this morning. Thank you for this opportunity to share your word and likewise to study your word. I ask you to bless this time together and bless our study and let the Spirit speak to us today in your name. Amen. All right, so Judges chapter 9 is where we're looking at today. And last week, we finished up, we reached the end of Gideon's life, and in turn, the end of his judgeship. So we saw that the last 40 years of Gideon's life, the land had rest. Then we saw in verse 33, it says, "Then it happened as soon as Gideon was dead, that the sons of Israel turned back and played the harlot with the Baals and made Baal-berith their god." And that's kind of where we left off on chapter 8 there. So Gideon left a legacy. So what we're going to look at today is, what's our legacy? And if we remember, Gideon's legacy was double-mindedness. He spoke out of both sides of his mouth because he was double-minded. Remember, he started off, he was humble. He was threshing wheat in a wine press out of fear. He said neither he or his children would rule the people because God would rule the people. But at the same time, he took the war spoil, the victories from the war. He said, "Let me get those earrings, guys." And then he turned those into an ephod to be worshipped. He was not a priest, yet he still made this ephod. He took many wives, even in different cities, concubines, something that a king would do, all while denying that he was a king or that he even wanted to be king. And then remember, one of his concubines had a son that Gideon himself, it says, named Abimelech, which means my father is king. So he was double-minded the whole way through, but the land had rest while he was judging. And from all intents and purposes, Scripture paints a good picture about Gideon, even though he did have some failures later on in life. We said that he wasn't a priest, but he made that ephod. We covered last week that the ephod was the garment that the high priest wore. He made it out of gold, and that the Israelites ended up worshiping his golden ephod. So he led them back into idolatry directly just from that. The ephod that he made, remember, weighed over 1,700 shekels of silver or of gold. All them gold earrings that they gave him, the weight of those was 1,700 shekels. Remember, the Lord was betrayed for 30 shekels of silver. We're talking 1,700 shekels of gold. And it says plus whatever the kings and their camels had. So the 1,700 shekels, that was from the common folk. The kings and the king's camels would have had a lot more weight, a lot bigger jewelry. So who knows how much the total weight actually was, but it was over 1,700 shekels, this ephod that he made that ended up being an idol. So Gideon's double-mindedness leads us directly into chapter 9, and we'll see the effect that had. We already saw the effect it had on the nation, right? As soon as he died, they went back into idolatry. So we know the effect it had on the nation, and today we're going to look at this chapter, and that's going to show the effect that it had on his own family and the nation. So chapter 9, starting at verse 1, it reads, "And Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal," remember, Jerubbaal is Gideon. This is his Canaanite name. "And Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem to his mother's relatives and spoke to them and to the whole family of the household of his mother's father, saying, 'Speak now in the hearing of all the lords of Shechem.'" So the lords of Shechem, these are elders, right? The kind of the important people of the city. So "Speak in the hearing of all the lords of Shechem, which is better for you, that 70 men, all the sons of Jerubbaal," remember Gideon had 70 sons, right? So, "Which is better for you, men of Shechem, that 70 men, all the sons of Jerubbaal, rule over you, or that one man rules over you? Also, remember that I am your bone and your flesh." And his mother's relatives spoke all these words on his behalf in the hearing of all the lords of Shechem, and they were inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, "He is our relative." So they gave him 70 pieces of silver from the house of Baal-berith in which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless men, and they followed him. So we need to understand what's happening here in the first 4 verses. This is the son that Gideon named, "My father is king." That's Abimelech. He is the one that we're going to be focused on today. He just saw his father die. It says as soon as Gideon died. So he just saw his father die. I don't know if he was there with him or if he caught word of it from outside. It doesn't say. But he just at least received the news that his father died. Then he goes to his mother's city. Remember, she's a concubine, so she lives in a different city than Gideon. So he goes to her city and tells that whole city, "Hey, we're blood relatives. It's better that me by myself am your ruler instead of all 70 of us," right? So he goes in there. He's giving them the old shout down. He says, "I'm an heir to a throne. No throne exists. Israel does not have a king." But he still claims that he's the heir to this non-existent throne because his name, again, is "My father is king." So in his head, there might not be an acknowledgement that there's a king here, but sure, there was, and now there is, and it's me. And I'm going to consolidate power to myself in order to start this monarchy because I want to be king. Even if my father denied it, he still named me this. So I want to be king. And that's where he's at right now. So, and we'll find out as we move on that Abimelech he has quite a mouth on him. Most people in this chapter have big mouths. We'll cover that. So picking up verse 5. Then he came to his father's house at Ophrah and killed his brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal, 70 men on one stone, right? So Gideon killed all of his brothers. As we'll find out, all but one, right? 70 men on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left, for he hid himself. Then all the lords of Shechem and all Beth Millo assembled together, and they went and made Abimelech king by the oak of the pillar, which was in Shechem. Okay, so we understand what's going on. Gideon dies. His son Abimelech says, "Hey, the old ruler is out, and now there's 70 of us that need to decide who the new ruler is." Well, God didn't ordain the next judge yet, and there's no monarchy, so this is not how judgeship gets passed in families, right? Judgeship doesn't move like kingship, right? Monarchies hand down rulership in the family, right? The son of the king, the son of the queen. This is how monarchies work. That's not how judges work. God appoints a judge, they judge the land. Then should the time come again, God appoints the next judge. They're not the son of the previous judge or anything like that. In most cases, they're completely unconnected. But Abimelech, he wants to be king. There's 70 sons of Gideon. So he says, if I kill all the rest of them, I'll be the only heir left. So that would make me the only choice to be king. So that's what Abimelech is trying to do. Remember, his mom was from Shechem. That's why he went there. He told all those people, "Hey, we're all blood relatives. Support me and I'll be king. We can work together on this. You can be the people that first supported me, and that might get them a better place in my rulership if you support me early." So the elders of Shechem, they did, and Beth Millo, they get together, they make Abimelech king, but he's only king over them because God didn't appoint a king, and Israel has no king. So Abimelech makes himself king through these people of just those 2 towns, or just this small area here. He kills all of his brothers. They're all what we would call half brothers, same father, different mothers. But he's doing this so that he has no competition for the throne, right? So Abimelech goes, he kills all his brothers. It mentions one story here that we're going to look at for a second, where it says he killed them all on one stone. That's an interesting thing. I wonder why it's there. So he killed them all on one stone. It does indicate some sort of maybe a public execution. Maybe all these men were brought out and killed, maybe beheaded publicly. That's hard to say. But he had all of his brothers killed. It says on one stone. Then they made him king. But we know from scripture that Israelites did not have a king until Saul, and even Saul, being their first king, was not who God wanted. it is who God allowed. But David is the Lord's first chosen king, although he did designate Saul. I don't want to get too deep in the weeds there. Abimelech was not a king of Israel. So where did he do this? Where did he execute all of his brothers at? They did it at Shechem, right? And he stirs up all these people that made him king at Shechem. And if we remember that name, we remember Shechem's pretty important. Now, we already covered all the other places like Sukkoth, where Jacob had some encounters. We covered stuff last week of these different places that have forgotten Yahweh and turned to false gods. And now we see that Shechem's doing it too. But this one has been so recent. It's hard that they would have forgotten this. Even us, we studied this not too long ago, because this happens in the book of Joshua right before Judges. So we did look at something about this, and we're going to gloss back over it very quickly. So after dividing the promised land, Joshua knew that these men were not going to be faithful to Yahweh. So I'm going to read the whole chapter that this is from in Joshua, but we've already studied this once, so we're not going to get deep in it. This is going to be mostly just a reading of that chapter and then some commentary on it. So Joshua chapter 24, I'm going to go through pretty much the whole thing. All right. And it reads, "Then Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem." Okay, well, that's where we're at. So let's pick up here. He gathered them all to Shechem. These are the leaders of the tribes. "And called for the elders of Israel, and for their heads, and for their judges, and their officers. And they presented themselves before God. And Joshua said to all the people, 'Thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel, from ancient times your fathers lived beyond the river, namely Terah, the father of Abraham, and the father of Nahor, and they served other gods.'" Do you guys remember that Abraham's father was a pagan idol worshiper? And so was Abraham in his youth, right? This is what God called them out of to start the Hebrew people. This is how he started his chosen people. He called them out of pagan worship to start his own people, right? So, and also pay attention who is talking right there in verse 2. It says, "Thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel." So Joshua is talking, but he's talking as a prophet right now, because he's saying, "Thus says Yahweh," and then he uses the Lord's words. So he is telling you what the Lord is saying, and that's what we're following. Verse 3. "Then I took your father Abraham," the Lord speaking, "took your father Abraham from beyond the river and led him through all the land of Canaan and multiplied his seed and gave him Isaac. To Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau, and to Esau I gave Mount Seir to possess it. But Jacob and his sons went down to Egypt. Then I sent Moses and Aaron, and I smote Egypt." That means I destroyed Egypt, or I attacked Egypt by what I did in its midst. "And afterwards I brought you out." Remember the plagues? That's what he's talking about, right? Verse 6, "And I brought your fathers out of Egypt, and you came to the sea. And Egypt pursued your fathers with chariots and horsemen to the Red Sea. Then they cried out to Yahweh." He's talking. Who's talking? The Lord. But he's talking now in the third person in the same sentence, because he's saying "I" and using the divine name in the same sentence. This is interesting. All right. "They cried out to Yahweh, and he put darkness between you and the Egyptians, and brought the sea upon them and covered them. And your own eyes saw what I did in Egypt, and you lived in the wilderness for many days." Let's stop for a second right there and interrupt in case there's any confusion. The Lord is talking in first person and third person at the same time. Okay? How can this be? Let's explain it very quickly. When he says, let's look at verse 6. We can cover everything from verse 7. Okay? Verse 7 reads, "Then they cried out." This is the Lord speaking. Yahweh is speaking. "Then they cried out to Yahweh, and he put darkness between you and the Egyptians." Okay, what was the darkness between the Israelites and the Egyptians while they were leaving? What was the darkness? What was the light? They had the pillar of smoke and the pillar of fire, right? Now, as we've covered before, God that we refer to as God the Father is invisible, a spirit. Okay, so whenever we see a visible manifestation of the Lord, that is the same visible manifestation that we would later call Jesus Christ. Okay? Anytime you visibly see the Lord, it is the person that we would call Jesus, that would also have been called the angel of the Lord. This is all the same Lord, come in different ways. The difference being, when he came as the Christ, he actually came through birth and then lived the entire life of one singular fleshly human. Okay? These other times, he just interrupts our normal human life and just takes on a bodily form, or the form of a fire, or the form of a cloud. So what we have here in verse 7 is they cried out to Yahweh, and he put darkness between. This is the second, what we sometimes would call the second person of the Trinity. The visible Yahweh is the darkness between the Israelites and the Egyptians there. That's why we have Yahweh talking about himself in first person and third person in the same sentence, because the invisible spirit God is who they cried out to, and it is who put the plagues on Egypt. And then the visible Yahweh is who led them through the wilderness and was the pillar of fire and cloud that was visible. So that was the manifestation. Okay. That was what we would call the Shekinah glory. That's Christ. Christ is the glory of God. So moving on, still in Joshua, verse 8, still Yahweh talking. Then I brought you into the land of the Amorites who lived beyond the Jordan, and they fought with you. Then I gave them into your hand, and you took possession of their land, and I destroyed them before you. Then Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab, arose and fought against Israel. And he sent and summoned Balaam, the son of Beor, to curse you. Do you guys remember Balaam? Balaam had a donkey that he was in a conversation with. Yeah. So verse 10, but I was not willing to listen to Balaam. So he blessed you repeatedly, and I delivered you from his hand. Do you guys remember that? Every time he would go on a mountain and look at the Israelites, he would try to curse them. And every time he opened his mouth, only a blessing would come out. He kept trying to curse them, but he accidentally kept blessing them. That's a funny story. So that's what it's talking about. Verse 11. And you crossed the Jordan and came to Jericho. Remember the first fight when they came into the promised land, Jericho. And was it even a fight, right? All they did was surround it and blow some trumpets. They did what they were supposed to do. Yeah. So came to Jericho, and the citizens of Jericho fought against you, and the Amorite and the Perizzite and the Canaanite and the Hittite and the Girgashite and the Hivite and the Jebusite. Thus I gave them into your hand. Then I sent the hornet before you, and it drove out the two kings of the Amorites from before you, but not by your sword or your bow. Right? He's still making the point that I did all of these things for you. You did not do them. Verse 13, I gave you a land on which you had not labored, and cities which you had not built, and you have lived in them. And you are, that's a current tense, you are eating of vineyards and olive groves, which you did not plant. Remember, we went over this. The Lord gave them, the Canaanites, 400 years to repent. And when they didn't, they were judged. They were judged by the Israelites. So the Israelites got pre-made cities with pre-made farms and pre-made cattle. So it's all there for them. And God is saying, I did all of this for you, right? Verse 14 is where it switches. Joshua is done prophesying, and now he's talking for himself. Okay, so Joshua speaking, verse 14. So now fear Yahweh and serve him in integrity and truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve Yahweh. You guys remember that, right? And that's what they keep doing as we're studying Judges. They're not getting rid of these gods from beyond the river. No, they keep bringing them back in, right? So verse 15 is very popular, this section here, right? A lot of people know this section. If it is evil in your sight to serve Yahweh, choose for yourselves today who you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served, which were beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my house, we will serve Yahweh. And the people answered and said, far be it from us that we should forsake Yahweh to serve other gods. So they said the right thing, right? They say that they'll only serve the Lord. They promised, and they recite back all the things as we move on. They recite back all the good things that God did and that they'll live for him. We jump forward. Verse 19. Then Joshua said to the people, you will not be able to serve Yahweh, for he is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your transgression or your sins. If you forsake Yahweh and serve foreign gods, then he will turn and do you harm and consume you after he has done good to you. You understand what he's saying? He's blessed you so much. And if you turn your back on him, he's going to treat you the way he treated the people that you replaced, right? In verse 21, and the people said to Joshua, no, but we will serve Yahweh. And Joshua said to the people, you are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen for yourselves Yahweh to serve him. And they said, we are witnesses. Okay, so everybody's in agreement. We said we're going to do it. Hey, are you sure? I don't think you can, but are you sure? Because you're a witness against yourself. Okay, we are witnesses, so everybody's in agreement. Verse 23, so now, since we're in agreement, so now put away the foreign gods which are in your midst, and incline your hearts or turn your hearts towards Yahweh, the God of Israel. And the people said to Joshua, we will serve Yahweh our God, and we will listen to his voice. Right? So he keeps telling them, Joshua keeps telling them, you're going to turn your backs on God. You will not serve him. And they keep saying, no, we swear we'll be loyal, and they probably did have good intentions while they're going through this. And then we get to this interesting part in verse 25. So Joshua cut a covenant with the people that day and made for them a statute and a judgment in Shechem. So all this, remember, is happening in Shechem. Okay. Verse 26, and Joshua wrote these words in the book of the law of in the law of God. So that answers one question. These people didn't have a Bible yet, but they did have a book of the law of God, right? And he took a large stone and set it up there under the oak that was by the sanctuary of Yahweh. Okay, so obviously they put some sort of a temple structure by this oak, and that's where he put this stone that he put the law under. He has this stone here. Verse 27, Joshua said to all the people, behold, this stone shall be a witness against us, shall be for a witness against us. For it has heard all the words of Yahweh, which he spoke to us. Thus it shall be for a witness against you, lest you deny your God. Okay, so if we're having trouble understanding that, and that finishes our Joshua, we're going to jump back to Judges now. So these people made a covenant of loyalty in Shechem, right? The same city that Abimelech used as a base to create a coup to try to establish a monarchy. In Joshua, there's this stone that stood as a witness against them, a stone in Shechem that stood as a witness against them. There's a stone in Ophrah that became a witness against them. That's where Abimelech goes to kill all of his brothers. That's where Gideon's from. There's another stone there. That stone also became a witness against them. But lest we remember or forget, one brother did get away, Jotham, and that's going to matter. So back to Judges chapter 9 to verse 7 is where we'll pick back up. Jotham, he's the one that ran away or hid. He hid himself. Verse 7. Then they told Jotham. So they told Jotham what had happened, that Abimelech is now king in Shechem and Baal Berith. So they tell Jotham what's happened. So he went and stood on the top of Mount Gerizim and lifted his voice and called out. All right. So he's shouting from, so this is not Mount Everest. This is more of a very large hill overlooking the city, right? So he's standing on there shouting down to the people of the city, right? He's on a high place. They can all see him. They can hear him. He's elevated. He's talking down to them, yelling, shouting down. Okay. Thus he said to them, listen to me, O lords of Shechem. Now, who knows? He's not calling them all like the Lord, right? Lords of Shechem is the rulers or the important people, right? People of Shechem, important people of Shechem, right? Listen to me, O lords of Shechem, that God may listen to you, right? So listen to me so that God will listen to you. Okay. Verse 8. I love this parable. The trees surely went forth to anoint a king over them. So pay attention. It's basically, think of it as a riddle as we go through it the first time. We will go back, okay? But think of it as a riddle the first time through. Verse 8. The trees surely went forth to anoint a king over them. And they said to the olive tree, reign over us. But the olive tree said to them, shall I leave my fatness, which God and men are honored, and go wave over other trees? Then the trees said to the fig tree, you, come reign over us. But the fig tree said to them, shall I leave my sweetness and my good produce and go to wave over the trees? Then the trees said to the vine, you, come reign over us. But the vine said to them, shall I leave my new wine, which makes God and men happy, and go wave over the trees? Then all the trees said to the bramble, who knows what bramble is? It's brush. It's just brush, like all them branches you gather out of the yard and put in a pile for us to start a little fire. This is bramble. Bramble's brush. It's useless. How much shade is from brush? It isn't any, right? So anyways, verse 14, then all the trees said to the bramble, you, come reign over us. And the bramble said to the trees, if in truth you are anointing me as king over you, come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, may fire come out from the bramble and consume the cedars of Lebanon. Let's stop there. So that might seem a little confusing. What's all these trees about? Didn't Rush have a song about trees? Does this have something to do like that? No. All right. So we're going to understand the scene. We're going to go back through it. And thankfully, Jotham himself is going to interpret the whole thing in the verses coming up. But let's get ahead of it so we understand what all's going on. So make sure we understand the scene. The last remaining other son of Gideon, besides Abimelech, is Jotham. Okay. So he is shouting from a mountaintop. And he's telling a parable. So we already pointed out he's talking to the leaders in Shechem. These are the people that made Abimelech king. Then he talks about the trees. The trees are looking for a king from among them. Yes.
All right. So if there's a guy talking to all them people, you think God makes it so all of them?
Well, let me just use a different story to answer your question. So when Peter was preaching, there was all kinds of people that didn't speak the same language. And so they couldn't hear him, but for a different reason, right? But then they did hear him, right? So yes, the Lord would have enabled anybody that needed to hear it, whether it was because of volume or language, right? So he's given this speech. The trees are looking for a king from among them. They ask the great trees that bear good fruit to rule over them, right? We start off, they ask, is it the olive tree is that first? The olive tree, reign over us, right? And then they say to the fig tree, reign over us, right? See these people just enjoying themselves in the comfort and protection of these trees. The vine, right? Come reign over us, right? But notice that these great trees, these mighty trees, this olive, this fig tree, even the vine, they all declined because it was less honorable and a demotion to become a king and rule over the other trees than it was to do whatever their purpose was, right? Because they're saying they don't want to give up what their true reasoning was. They all give a reason first. The olive tree says he doesn't want to leave his fatness with which God and men are honored. The fig tree doesn't want to leave his sweetness and his good produce. The vine says doesn't want to leave the vine, which makes God and men happy. They don't want to leave their good things that they have purpose for, that God gave them a reason for, to do this other thing, in this case, become king, that they're not made to do. They're made to do what they do, not to rule over people. Do you understand? And then after that, after they asked the mighty trees to rule over them, and they kept saying, no, we're going to do what God called us to do and not this other thing. There's a few different ways to look at it. I did see one study on these three mighty trees represented Othniel, who was the first judge, Deborah, and Gideon. I don't see any support for that. Although they could represent three judges. I don't know why we would pick Othniel and Deborah, but I may be off on that because there were other ones mixed in there before these guys, right? One thing we know is that Gideon is one of these, or all of them. Gideon is definitely represented in this. And the next thing we can be certain of Oh, one reason we know that Gideon's tied to all this is because Gideon said the same thing. No, right? He was the tree that said, I'm not going to rule over you, nor will my sons rule over you, right? He said that. He said, let God rule over you. So Gideon might be represented by all of them, or maybe just one of them. We can't be sure. But when we come to verse 14 in the bramble, we do know that that is Abimelech. Notice he tells them to take refuge in his shade. How much shade does bramble give? None. Doesn't give any. How much protection? None, right? But then it says the fire will come out of the bramble and consume the cedars of Lebanon. And that represents the destruction that is going to come from this choice of choosing bramble. The people chose the bramble. The trees chose the bramble to rule over them. The people chose Abimelech to rule over them. And that's what his parable is about. So when that fire comes out from the bramble and consumes the cedars of Lebanon, that's the destruction that's being prophesied here. These people knew what Jotham was saying. They did not need an interpretation, but just in case they did, he does give it to them. So starting at verse 16, and they knew good and well before he said this, but now it makes it certain. Verse 16. So now, if you have dealt in truth and integrity and made Abimelech king, and if you have dealt well with Jerubbaal, remember that is Gideon, if you've dealt well with him and his house, and have dealt well with him according to the bountiful works of his hands. And then he kind of goes into a side thought. For my father fought for you and risked his life and delivered you from the hand of Midian. But you have risen against my father's house today and have killed his sons, 70 men on one stone, and have made Abimelech, the son of his maidservant, king over the lords of Shechem, because he is your relative. If then you have dealt in truth and integrity with Jerubbaal and his house this day, be glad in Abimelech, and let him also be glad in you. So he's saying, if you guys feel like you've done the right thing and acted in integrity, then be happy and let him be happy with you. But notice that the thought that he put in the middle of that conversation was, my father did all of these things for you, and you paid him back by killing all his sons on one stone. So I know, and you know, that you haven't dealt honestly, but if you think you have, then be happy. Verse 20, but if not, and we all know this is the case, it is not. Let fire come out from Abimelech and consume the lords of Shechem and Beth Millo, and let fire come out from the lords of Shechem and from Beth Millo and consume Abimelech. Right? So he's prophesying that these people are all just going to destroy each other because of what's happened. They're all guilty, and they all will be judged by each other. Verse 21, then Jotham escaped and fled and went to Beer and remained there because of Abimelech, his brother. And Abimelech governed over Israel 3 years. Have we seen any judge that only got 3 years? No. And we still haven't, because Abimelech's not a judge. He's not a king and he's not a judge. He's just somebody that tried to usurp power. Okay. And that's what this whole chapter is about. So he governed over Israel 3 years. Then God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the lords of Shechem. So, hey, does God also control what we would call the bad guys? Yep. So God sent the evil spirit between Abimelech and the lords of Shechem. And the lords of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, so that the violence done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might come, and their blood might be laid on Abimelech, their brother, who killed them, and on the lords of Shechem, who strengthened his hands to kill his brothers. Remember, he took up an offering. Really, he said, "Hey guys, support me financially to be king." In other words, let me get a few soldiers hired out of this, some worthless men, so that they can come with me and we can kill all my brothers, and then I can be king, right? And that's what that's talking about, strengthening his hand to kill his brothers. Verse 25, and the lords of Shechem set men in ambush against him on the tops of the mountains, and they robbed all who might pass them along the road. And it was told to Abimelech. Now, why would he care? If the rulers of Shechem put people in ambush on the tops of the mountains, and them robbing people that were coming in and out of the city, that's the reason why that would bother Abimelech is, how is he going to get tax money if all these people are getting robbed before they get to his town? You can't pay your taxes to the king if they're all getting robbed before they get there, right? They're doing this on purpose to mess with him. Verse 26, then Gaal, and you can just tell right away, just because of the name and the structure and the spelling and pronunciation of the name, you know who this guy's worshiping. Then Gaal, the son of Ebed, came with his relatives, and they crossed over into Shechem. And the lords of Shechem put their trust in him, right? This guy, Gaal, he comes over, he starts to sweet talk to people. They start to like him. Maybe he starts saying, hey, I can maybe run this thing. And maybe they start to listen, right? Verse 27, and they went out into the field and gathered the grapes of their vineyards and trod them and celebrated a festival, right? So they took the grapes to the wine press. They made wine. They got drunk. That's all it's talking about. And they came to the house of their God and ate and drank and cursed Abimelech. So it is actually a pagan religious festival that they're celebrating here in Shechem, this place where Joshua said they wouldn't listen to Yahweh and they wouldn't follow him, the place where Joshua put the law under the stone beside the temple to Yahweh. That's the place they're at. And they're having this festival, pagan religious festival. There's apparently a lot of wine involved. They get to drinking. They're running their mouths. I imagine, as with most of these, you have a lot of wine, not a lot of clothes, and then you get, as you would in any scenario where you have guys with too much wine, you have big mouths that don't stop running, right? So, and that's why side thought, that is our concern with alcohol. Alcohol is not a sin, right? It's how we use alcohol that's a sin. And for example, children drinking alcohol would inherently be sinful because their parents are the overseers for them, and without that permission, that would be a sin for a child. Now, for an adult that wanted to drink alcohol, he would have to use that urge against Scripture and make sure he's not violating anything in that. But we're not going to get into details there. But one thing we can say with certainty is the downside, or one of the many downsides, would be if you're having alcohol, maybe you end up having too much alcohol, and then maybe you start running your mouth, and now you're writing checks, and now who's going to cash them, right? And that happens right here. So verse 28, then Gaal, the son of Ebed, said, who is Abimelech? Who is Shechem that we should serve him? Right? He's very drunk. He's shouting in, it's not a bar. It's their temple. It's their religious temple that he's drunk in. So he's shouting there. Who is Abimelech and who is Shechem that we should serve him? Is he not the son of Jerubbaal? And is Zebul not his officer? Serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem. But why should we serve him? Would therefore that this people were under my hand, then I would remove Abimelech. And then he said to Abimelech, increase your army and come out. Let's stop there. This can be kind of confusing here because if we're not remembering our previous studies, we might be wondering what he's talking about. So this guy comes into town. He gets drunk at this festival. He's saying, who's Abimelech that we should serve him? In other words, who's this guy think he is? Why should he be our ruler? His next sentence, isn't he the son of Gideon, basically, right? He's Gideon's son. Why are we serving him? Shouldn't we serve the men that are from here? And that's what he's talking about. Serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem. What he's saying is, our king, we should be ruled by somebody from here. Abimelech's not from Shechem, right? We should be ruled by somebody from here. That one of the people that has been here the whole time, that has grown up with us, that is among us. Now remember, Abimelech tricked these people because he said, we're all flesh and blood, the same family, right? Just because his mom was family with these guys. But that doesn't mean that they saw him. He was still an outsider to them too. But his maniacal tirade did cause them to make him king, but it doesn't mean they're necessarily loyal to him, right? So this guy Gaal, he shows up and he says, you guys should be ruled by somebody from Shechem. That guy's me. This is what he's saying. He's nominating himself. And then at the end, well, in verse 29, where he says, I would therefore that these people were under my hand. In other words, he's saying, I wish that I was in control, right? I wish they were under my authority. Then I would remove Abimelech, right? And then he said to Abimelech, and as we know, Abimelech's not even in this town right now. Abimelech's at his own town, which is about 5 miles away. So when it says he said to Abimelech, basically it's old man yelling at a cloud. He's shouting into the wind, kind of looking in that direction, but there's nothing that would make us believe that Abimelech could hear him from the next town over, right? He's just shouting out into the wind because he's drunk. Increase your army and come out. There's a couple reasons he could say that. It seems like the main reason he would say that is if he's taunting Abimelech, even if Abimelech cannot hear him, the people that he's with can hear him. So he's basically saying, look, I will stand up to him. You people support me in this. And then we'll see. Maybe I will be the next ruler. And that's what he's trying to get to happen. So he's making his own coup for a kingdom that still doesn't exist, for a crown that is not real, but he wants it now. So we're fighting over imaginary rulership. And that'll take us to verse 30. Then Zebul, and we just touched on him a minute earlier. We'll get a little deeper into him, but not too. Zebul, the ruler of the city. So basically, they made Abimelech king, but since he lives in a different city, he has a proxy that runs Shechem for him. That's Zebul. Zebul runs Shechem for Abimelech, while Abimelech lives in his city. Okay? So Zebul, the ruler of the city, heard the words of Gaal, the son of Ebed, and his anger burned. And he sent messengers to Abimelech deceitfully. In other words, secretly or at night, he sent these messengers in saying, behold, Gaal, the son of Ebed, and his relatives have come to Shechem. And behold, they are stirring up the city against you. So now arise by night, you and the people who are with you, and lie in wait in the field. Right? They're setting up an ambush here. Lie wait in the field, and it will be in the morning, as soon as the sun is up, that you shall rise early and rush upon the city. And behold, he and the people who are with him will come out against you, and you shall do to them whatever your hand finds pleasing. In other words, hey, this guy's here stirring it up. He's trying to cause a revolt against you. So wait outside the city gates for an ambush. And when he comes out in the morning, you got him. Okay? Also, note, if his coup against Abimelech is successful, as he pointed out previously, he knows that Zebul is running the city for Abimelech. Gaal knows that. So if his coup is successful, Zebul knows he's probably going to get killed because he's part of the previous kingship, Abimelech's, right? So it's no mystery why he wants to help Abimelech instead of help these people. All right, verse 34. So Abimelech and all the people who were with him arose by night and lay in wait against Shechem in 4 companies. So he split up the people into 4 groups. They're setting up the ambush. He would have learned this from Gideon, right? Gideon split into 3. Abimelech's got his people in 4 companies. Verse 35, and Gaal, the son of Ebed, went out and stood in the entrance of the city gate. And Abimelech and the people who were with him arose from the ambush. Then Gaal saw the people and said to Zebul, behold, people are coming down from the tops of the mountains. But Zebul said to him, you are seeing the shadow of the mountains as if they were men. So let's paint the picture of what's going on here. So this is the next morning, right? Abimelech already knows what's going on. Zebul's already warned him. Abimelech has the ambush set up. They're all just waiting, right? Everybody's waiting. And then this guy, Gaal, he gets up and he looks out, and the mountains, it looks like there's people coming down the mountains towards Shechem. But Zebul, he's trying to buy time for Abimelech for the ambush, right? So he doesn't say, yeah, look at all those guys. He says, no, that's just shadows. It's the morning time. The sun's still rising. The shadows are moving down the mountain. When the sun rises, the shadows move, right? So he's saying, it's just the shadows. You think the shadows are men. It's no big deal. Don't worry about it. Verse 37. Yet Gaal spoke again and said, behold, people are coming down from the highest part of the land, and one company comes by the way of the soothsayer's oak. Then Zebul said to him, I love this verse, and I wish we could read every separate translation. Then Zebul said to him, where is your boasting now? Or where is your mouth now? Or where is your big mouth now? Or where is your confidence now? All these different translations. I'm not sure which ones you guys have, but either way, Zebul is clearly making fun of him. Where is your mouth now? Where is your boasting now? With which you said, who is Abimelech that we should serve him? Is this not the people who you rejected? Go out now and fight with them. So Zebul is saying, hey, big mouth, where's it at now? Here they come. This is the guy you said, increase your army and let's make war. Here he is. Go do it. He says, go do it. Another reason why he would maybe say it like that is, keep in mind there's an ambush. So now that there's no doubt that Gaal has seen this first wave and he's going out to meet him, he doesn't want him to see the rest of the ambush, right? So don't wait there for them to get here. That makes an ambush pointless. You need to go out and attack those people. And when he leaves the city to go out and attack, that's when an ambush works. So that's why Zebul is kind of egging him on and prodding him. He's picking at his pride. Where's your big mouth at? Go out and these are the people you rejected. This is who you said increase your army. So just go do it then. All right. Verse 39. So Gaal went out before the lords of Shechem and fought with Abimelech. And Abimelech chased him, and he fled before him. And many fell dead upon the entrance of the gate. Then Abimelech remained at Arumah, but Zebul drove out Gaal and his relatives, so they could not remain at Shechem. Right? So Abimelech never went into the city of Shechem. When Gaal brought his army out to attack Abimelech, Abimelech defeated them outside the gates and chased Gaal. But when Gaal went back into the city, Abimelech did not chase him into the city. I don't know if he didn't trust the people there. It seems like that's probably what it was. But it says that Abimelech went back to Arumah. That's the city about 5 miles away from Shechem. That's his home. So he went back to his house. And then Zebul, who's running Shechem for Abimelech, it says he drove out Gaal and his relatives so they could not remain in Shechem. Okay. So Abimelech wins this battle. Gaal runs back into the city, but Zebul ends up driving him out anyways. That takes us to verse 42. And this is where things really start coming apart, right? We've had this, what seems like a bit of an uprising against Abimelech. It seems in the big picture like kind of a minor thing that was squashed pretty easily, but not in his mind for sure. So verse 42, this is the next day. Now it happened the next day that people went out to the field. This is the people of Shechem. They went out into the field, and it was told Abimelech. Now remember, Abimelech's town is only about 5 miles away. It doesn't take that long to get there. These people go out into the field outside Shechem, and they tell, and then that information is given to Abimelech. Verse 43. So he took his people and divided them into 3 companies, and lay in wait in the field. Then he looked, and behold, the people were coming out of the city. So he rose against them and struck them down. This doesn't say soldiers. It just says the people of the city. So his 3 companies strikes them down. Then Abimelech and the company who was with him rushed forward and stood in the entrance of the city gate. So again, he hasn't entered the city yet. He's staying, for some reason, he's staying at the gate or out. Okay. But the other 2 companies rushed upon all who were in the field and struck them down. So basically Abimelech is guarding the gate. So the people that left the city to go out in the field can't get back in. Right. So they're just easy pickings for Abimelech's other troops that are out in the field. So they kill all of them. Verse 45. So Abimelech fought against the city all that day, and he captured the city and killed the people who were in it. Then he tore the city down and sowed it with salt. These are the people that made Abimelech king, that he just did this to. This is Jotham's prophecy happening in real time. And then he tore down the city and sowed it with salt. Why do you sow it with salt? Right? You put enough salt on that ground, nothing grows. You cannot grow anything. You can't even grow grass. Right? You have dead land for a good amount of years, for the foreseeable future, from sowing salt all over the land. So not only did he tear down their city, he made it uninhabitable for a time. So he really just wanted to get rid of Shechem all completely. But he's not done yet. Verse 46. Then all the lords of the tower of Shechem heard of it, and they entered the inner chamber of the temple of El-Berith. And it was told to Abimelech that all the lords of the Tower of Shechem were gathered together. So Abimelech went up to Mount Zalmon, he and all the people who were with him, and Abimelech took an axe in his hand and cut down a branch from the trees and lifted it and laid it on his shoulder. Then he says to all the people who are with him, what you have seen me do, hurry and do likewise. Right? So Abimelech cuts off a tree branch and says, you guys do the same thing. Everybody get a tree branch. That's what he's saying. Verse 49, and all the people also cut down each one his branch and followed Abimelech and put them on the inner chamber and set the inner chamber on fire over those inside, so that all the men of the Tower of Shechem also died, about 1,000 men and women. So Abimelech is still wiping out civilians here. The last of the people escaped to El-Berith, and they trapped themselves inside this tower, which is going to be fortified. Abimelech and his worthless men are not going to be able to take a tower. So instead of doing that, they take branches and they put the branches all over the tower and then light the branches on fire. So they kill everybody inside by fire. Also a part of Jotham's prophecy. Verse 50. Then Abimelech went to Thebez. So he's not done yet. He's just wiped out 2 full cities, and he's not done yet. Now he's going to Thebez, and he camped against Thebez and captured it. But there was a strong tower in the center of the city. So we know where this is going, right? The people are going to lock themselves inside the tower again for safety, and he's going to burn it down again, right? Maybe, right? There was a strong tower in the center of the city, and all the men and women with all the lords of the city fled there and shut themselves in. And they went up on the roof of the tower. So Abimelech came to the tower and fought against it and approached the entrance of the tower to burn it with fire. So we see this is the exact same thing on his mind again. He's going to do it again. He wants to do it again. He is not going to. Verse 53, but a certain woman, not even a name, and I think that's on purpose. A certain woman threw an upper millstone on Abimelech's head, and she smashed his skull. It did not kill him. He was going to die. Whatever this wound was, it did smash his skull, and it was mortal. He was going to die from it slowly and painfully, but apparently he could still talk. So verse 54, then he called quickly to the young man that was his armor bearer and said to him, draw your sword and put me to death, so they don't say of me, a woman killed him. So the young man pierced him through and he died. So in verse 53, where it says a certain woman, and she's unnamed, I think that's on purpose. And I think the whole story's in there on purpose. This story does not say Abimelech was killed by a soldier during a battle. This section of scripture says Abimelech had his skull crushed by a woman and then had to have his own armor bearer kill him so that to save him the dignity of being killed by an unknown woman. It didn't save him that dignity, because here it is. We're reading it. We're reading it just for him. The Lord left this in here just for him. So one last thumb in the eye for Abimelech. He was killed by a woman and his own armor bearer. He knows he can't recover from his wound. Whatever this upper millstone was, look, from the top of a tower, it doesn't take much of a stone to kill you, right? So we don't know how big or small this was, but whatever it was left a mortal wound that he tried to escape the indignity of dying from, though unsuccessfully. I have a note here. He may not have been finally killed by the woman, but she defeated him to the point of death. I like that. Yeah. So he was defeated by her. Verse 55. Oh, here's my little picture. Certainly that's not the millstone, but it does give us an idea. All the men are hiding, and this certain woman, unnamed, is the one that drops the stone while the men are hiding. Judges full of weak men, strong women. Here we go. Verse 55. Then the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, so each went away to his home. All right, so how loyal were the men with Abimelech? They were not, right? They knew he was a madman. They knew he was a maniac. What we have here is probably a certain mix of people that were loyal Israelites that said, you know, we're Israelites, so if we have an Israelite king, I guess we should support him. But you can see that as soon as he was dead, they were like, all right, cool, let's get out of here. Right? They were not upset about this at all. They went back home. So any Israelites who may have been following Abimelech out of duty to the nation, they just left. They went home after he died. It shows they did not support him. Nobody went to take his place like, oh, he's down, I'm king now. No, nobody got that crazy. Nope, they just went home. Verse 56. Thus God returned the evil of Abimelech, which he had done to his father in killing his 70 brothers. Keep in mind, what's that say? Did Abimelech do evil to his brothers? Well, yeah, kind of, but that's not what it's concerned with. It says God returned the evil of Abimelech, which he did to his father by killing his brothers. So Gideon no longer he had 70 sons to have a namesake out of. And now they're all dead, except for the one that ran, including Abimelech. They're all dead. Yeah.
What happened to the one that ran?
We'll come to that. He seemingly went on to have a good life.
I'm surprised he didn't snitch.
He did more than snitch. He prophesied what was going to happen to Abimelech that killed all of them, and he prophesied what was going to happen to the city that was responsible for that, and then all of those things happened. So he's God's speaking through him. So I think he's doing okay. Yeah. So verse 57, God also returned all the evil of the men of Shechem on their own heads, and the curse of Jotham, the son of Jerubbaal, came upon them. Right. This is why all those people had to die by fire, and why Abimelech also had to die in this all together. And they had to die at each other's hands because of this. They were each responsible for the other. That takes us back. I believe that's the last verse. That curse comes upon them. So let's go back and remember where all this stemmed from. Verse 19 and 20. If you have dealt in truth and integrity with Jerubbaal and his house this day, be glad in Abimelech, and let him also be glad in you. Were either one of them happy with the other? Nope. Okay. So that takes us to verse 20, because if not, we've just established it's not. So let fire come out from Abimelech and consume the lords of Shechem and Beth Millo. Did that happen? Yep. And let fire come out from the lords of Shechem and from Beth Millo and consume Abimelech. Now, I guess technically he didn't get burned, but or maybe he did, because he was taking wood to that tower to burn it down when she smashed his head. So he may have also caught himself on fire with the fire he was holding. I don't know, but this prophecy is nailed. So the beginning of the chapter tells us about the end. We travel back. We can see these things that Jotham spoke of. They did happen. And if we think, well, that's Old Testament and we're living in New Testament, so I think maybe we might be able to get away with it these days. Paul doesn't agree. In Galatians chapter 6, verse 7, among many places, it says, do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, this he will also reap. Abimelech sowed destruction, and that's what he reaped. Unfortunately, before that, Gideon sowed double-mindedness, and that is what he got back, both in the nation and in his own family. And then his family leading in and sowing destruction. So this all stems from that. It's an example of how our own double-mindedness or any other flaw that we might have might leave a bad legacy onto either the people that were around or our families, and they can have a bad effect on both. Abimelech had destruction everywhere he went. We need to keep in mind that everywhere we go, we're sowing something. We don't need to sow sin or evil or in my case, am I sowing bitterness? Am I complaining? We got to be careful what we sow, because when we sow something, we're going to get a harvest back, right? So what we're supposed to sow is little seeds of faith. Sow seeds of faith. That's what we need to be sowing, not destruction or bitterness or anything like that. Yeah. And that's where we're going to close for today.